Hello, I am Dr. Catherine Dutton, the chair of the Digital Learning and Teaching Department at the American College of Education. Today, I'm here to talk to you about more than pretty pictures, using Pinterest to build a personal learning network. This webinar is part of the DigiToolKit series. It's offered monthly through the American College of Education. Of course, it's open to anyone who's interested in participating. We will address topics relating to digital tools, learning and technology, and how all of that feeds back into education. We are so glad that you're here today to join us for this webinar. As I think about building my personal learning network, the reason that I enjoy having a digital personal learning network is multifaceted. And here on the screen are some of those reasons. My digital learning network can be accessed anytime from anywhere. It provides me inspiration on how to enhance and invigorate my classroom. I gain a global perspective of experts from around the world. I'm able to open doors for myself and for my students. I'm also able to refuel, to find new ideas, and to find ways to make things that maybe weren't working so well, to make them work better. It also gives me an opportunity to benefit from mentoring of experts, of people who are truly master teachers in our field. When I think about building a personal learning network, the first thing that comes to my mind is Stephen Downes, a researcher who talks about connectivism. And he tells us that education isn't something that is provided for us, but we need to think of it as something that we create ourselves. And I think this applies very well when we think about a personal learning network because our personal learning network is truly something that we have to create for ourselves. It's not something that our school district creates for us. They can try, but when we are looking for the right tools and the right information for us, it's something that we have to cultivate and curate ourselves. So as I think about this image comes to mind that, and here he contrasts the traditional teacher to the networked teacher. And here the traditional teacher has access to curriculum documents, their colleagues, popular media, print and digital resources, and their family and their local community. Now, the network teacher can extend so much further beyond their their local current what's available to them. They can use blogs, they can use wikis, they can use video conferences, they can use chat, social networking, social bookmarking. All of these things are at their disposal. Now, you don't have to use all of these things, but you have the options to use all of these things. The other thing that you see in the difference between the traditional teacher and the network teacher is that many of these for the traditional teacher are one-way interactions. The curriculum documents are given to you. Same with the print and digital resources. You have some conversations, but when you open that door to social media and to those other social outlets online, you'll notice that that every single one of them allow the option for two-way conversation, not only for other people to give you information, but for you to share information with them as well. Now, before we talk about Pinterest and why I love it, because I do want to talk just a little bit about the stages of personal learning network development. And I think this is important anytime that we start talking about exploring a new technology. Because one thing that I frequently hear is, but it takes so much time to do this. And you're right, it does take time. And I am not going to tell you that it doesn't. Through the stages of personal learning network development, we can see that there is definitely a track that you go through. The first is immersion, where you find as many tools as you possibly can, and you try to use all of those tools. When I think about my own journey into developing my personal learning network online, I first started with Blogger. I started with Twitter. I started with Dig. I started with Delicious. I started with Facebook. I had, well, Pinterest, I don't think even existed at that point, but at some point I added that in and I was trying to use all these tools. And it was truly an immersion moment of, wow, there's a lot here. And then you move into phase two, which is evaluation, where you say, okay, these are the tools that are working for me. These are the tools that aren't working for me. And you start to narrow it down to one or two, maybe three tools that work the best for you. Then you move into a stage called the know-it-all stage. And now this isn't you being a know-it-all. You want to know it all. And you see all of the rich resources that are available to you, and you want to embrace all of that knowledge. But you recognize that you're probably not going to be able to. So that moves us into perspective, where you start to realize that you're not going to be able to garner all knowledge overnight. So you don't have to spend every waking moment trying to. And this usually comes at the moment when you have a family vacation or a weekend away and you don't have internet access, so you can't constantly check Facebook or you can't um, see if somebody's retweeted you this morning, whatever it is. And so you start to develop some perspective that, you know what, you're not going to learn it all overnight. You don't have to learn it all overnight. And then you're going to move into that final stage, which is balance, where you go to the tools that you need when you need it. You know how to use them in the most effective way that works for you, but it doesn't feel all time consuming. So when I think about Pinterest and how I use it, I'd like to relate it back to when I was in junior high and I sifted through magazines through my house and I would cut out pictures out of the magazines and I would pin them, literally pin them with a push pin to a cork board that was in my bedroom. Pinterest is much like this, except you have multiple boards and many different magazines, if you will, that you're pulling from. You can pull from any website, anywhere on the web, and you can pin to any board that you desire with any topic that you want. Pinterest is visual because you have the opportunity to see your collection of bookmarks as images. It's social because it has an opportunity to comment and to collaborate with other people. Now, just a fun fact, Pinterest is the third most popular social networking site behind Facebook and Twitter. It's one of the fastest growing, it is the fastest growing social network as well. Kind of took the world by storm when it exploded a couple of years ago. Now, let me show you why I really love Pinterest. So when I log into Pinterest, I see a feed of what the people who I follow, what they've recently pinned. So I logged in today and this is what I saw. Facebook finally gets a hashtag support. Ooh, that sounds interesting. So I click the image and it then makes the image bigger. If the image had more information on it, I probably would have been more interested to sit there and read it a little bit more. But then if I click this image one more time, it then takes me to the Mashable website where I can read the full article about Facebook finally getting hashtag support. So what Pinterest is it's not just all of these pretty pictures. If you'll pardon me referencing the title of this presentation, it's more than those pretty pictures. They are direct links or bookmarks to websites as well. And that's where the value of Pinterest comes in, is using this visual bookmarking method to gather and to compile resources in a way that you'll remember what those resources are and that you'll be able to quickly identify which resources you need. Now let's talk a little bit about a workflow for using Pinterest. When you first create your account, you're going to want to get some extensions or a bookmarklet, if you will, depending on the type of browser that you use. If you use Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, each of them have a different way that you can install something that gives you a one-click way to pin to your screen. Let me show you what I'm talking about. When I open if I'm searching Edudemic, which is a wonderful resource for educators, full of articles, and I'm scrolling through here and, this is a really interesting article. I think I'd like to keep this. Share it again. I can click my Pin It button up on my toolbar. I then am presented with all of the images that were on that web page. Sometimes those are images that I really don't care about or wow, didn't even realize were there. But I can pick the one that I saw on the web page, which was that Great Wall of Awesome. I can select my board, which was teaching. I can say that Great Wall of Awesome, good idea for classroom space. And then I can pin it. And what's going to happen here is it's going to pin it to my teaching board on Pinterest. I'll even have an option to to be able to go back to see that pin. So again, that's called a bookmarklet, that quick little pin it button. How do you get one on your browser? Well, Pinterest actually has a wonderful website in their help guides. It's called the goodies area. And in the goodies area, you can get the pin it button or the Pinterest bookmarklet, depending on what you prefer. And depending on the web browser that you have. Now, the nice thing that Pinterest will do here, and the reason I'm not going to explain how to install it, is because that installation is going to be different for every single web browser. So what I recommend that you do is you go to about.pinterest.com/goodies, and you will get directions specifically for your web browser how to install it. For the Pinterest bookmarklet, it was as easy as dragging it up to my bookmarks bar. So, but different browsers have different rules or different ways of working, so your mileage may vary. Now, when we talk about Pinterest, the next thing that you're going to want to do is create some boards. Now, your boards can be very broad in topic, or they could be very specific topics. For example, when I started teaching when I started using Pinterest rather, my boards were very broad. In fact, that you might say they possibly were too broad. Um, they worked for what I was doing initially though. So it was fine initially. Fine. I started with a teaching board and I started with I started with some other boards. And my teaching board has grown and grown and grown because there's a lot of great resources for teachers on Pinterest. And now it has over 100 pins, which is kind of a lot to sift through. And, they're all about teaching, but they're not necessarily all something that I need right now at that moment. So now I might decide to hone in on some different topics and create a digital learning board or a one-to-one integration board, or I might even do a board about classroom management. You can see where I've started to hone in on some topics where in family and consumer sciences, which is what I taught in high school, I have specific boards for resources for those topics. So depending on what works best for you, you may choose to create very broad boards. You may choose to create more specific boards. It's really up to your preference. Now, I recommend that you begin to explore other people's boards. Use search and look at the people who are repinning your pins. If we start to use search, so if we search educational technology, you can see that there's a vast amount of resources for this one topic. We can look at it by individual pins if we want to look at each resource. We can look at it by boards to see perhaps these are some different people that we want to follow. And you can see how many pins each board has. So is it enough pins? Is it not many pins? Is it a lot of pins? Or you can look at it by pinner, where you can then go and see what else that person's pinning about and see if they have multiple boards that you want to follow. The other thing that you might want to do is to comment, to like, or to repin different pins. For example, if I go to this digital storytelling board, and let's say as I'm scrolling through here, I think, wow, I really think that this is an interesting resource. I'd like to have that on my board as well. You can pin it and add it to your board. So you may ask yourself, how do teachers actually use Pinterest to build their personal learning network? What type of information are they putting on there? You've told me that it's a visual bookmarking system, but what does that really mean for me as a teacher? So I really like this infographic that comes from Edudemic, that I found off of Edudemic, that talks about some of the different ways that teachers can use Pinterest for themselves or for their classes. Um, you could create a resource board. You could pin current events or issues to a board for students to read each day. You could use the search bar to find on-topic comment content. You could use it for classroom management tips, lesson plan ideas. You can use it to organize. One of the important things to do with Pinterest is add a comment so you can easily remember why that link was important to you. Um, I like this idea of creating a board that inventories your class library so students know which books and resources are available to them. Other things that you can do is collaborate with other people, collaborating with other teachers who have similar ideas or similar projects or do similar units. You can ask for feedback. You can create a community board for other people to share resources. You can allow your students to use Pinterest. There's some pros and cons to this, and I don't know that it would be you'd really have to think through this, and it might not work with your school's social media policy as well. But there are some ways that you could think about using it for students. And one might be even having a place that's sources for classroom projects so that students have a quick place to go to pull web links. Um, Another thing that you can do, as you see here, is start to follow other educators and start to gather some of those resources. You may ask, so what educators should I start to follow? Um, and those, and I've gathered a few people who I think are good resources with quality pins, who pin on a fairly regular basis, and they pin interesting things about education. Some of those people include Edutopia, um, Kathy Schrock. Most people know Kathy Schrock. Eric Scheninger. He's a principal, and has some really interesting, very detailed, honed in topics that are interesting to look at. Another one that I really like is the American College of Education, where I have the opportunity to work. And they have some good boards with some good information on more specific topics as well. So if you are interested and you'd like to, you are more than welcome to follow who to follow my Forming a PLN board. The address is right down here at the bottom at bit.ly/PLN boards. Be sure it's plural at the end. Now, for those of you who are a little more experienced with Pinterest, I just want to share a few cool pinning tricks that you might want to consider using. If you use Google Chrome as your web browser, I'm sorry to those of you who don't. This is the only web browser that has these extensions. I checked on the other ones. Google Chrome allows you to install some different extensions, which are add-ons for for your for your screen. Two of these allow you to pin your screen. So let's say that you're surfing a website and it only has text. It doesn't have any images on it. Well, if you try to use the Pinterest bookmarklet, it's not going to work. However, if you use Pin My Screen, it actually takes a screenshot of your active web page and creates a pin from that. That's actually how I created the pins for this Forming a PLN board, is I used the Pin My Screen bookmarklet. or extension rather. Shot Pin is another extension that allows you to select an area of the screen and to create a pin. So this would allow you to select a more precise area of the screen and create a pin based on that. So it could be a section of an image, or it could be the entire screen. That's really up to you. The other cool pinning trick is an extension that's called Share as Image. Now this can be used on any browser. And on this, you could select some text on a web page. Let's say you found a really cool quote and you wanted to remember it. So you could select that text and you can pin it as an image too. So using this tool involves a bookmarklet, again, share as image, that then takes the text that I've selected and gives me some options. You can make it look all snazzy if you're willing to spend a little extra money and do their paid version. But for their free version, you get an image that looks pretty nice and allows you to remember it. And it also gives you the original source of that quote. Now let's talk for just a moment about liking versus repinning. This is an important differentiation. When you repin another pin, that pin that you've repinned goes onto one of your boards. Anything that you do that goes onto one of your boards is going to go into the feed that those who follow you will see. Let me give you an example. When I log into Pinterest whenever I log into Pinterest, I see on the on my front page, I see a feed of what the people who I follow have recently pinned. I may see things that I want to see. I may see things that I'm like, maybe I need to unfollow that board. um, and it really allows me to hone down what boards I'm following because I can quickly take off things that I'm not interested in. But if, let's say, for example, that you really wanted to focus on having an educator's presence on Pinterest, and you didn't want the picture of the cool garden to show up on your Pinterest feed. That wasn't really, you wanted to remember it, but you didn't want to show it up. What you can do instead is you can actually like that image. And so if I like an image, I'm able to see what I liked, but no one else is able to see it. So it's a more private way to keep a bookmark without having it on a board. Now, the thing that doesn't really work so well with that is that the things that I like, they aren't going to I can't organize those. So anything that I have on my like board, let's make that go away. Anything that I have on my like board is only going to be just a whole bunch of pins. It's not going to be something that anybody else that I can organize like I might want to. Now, the other thing that you can actually do as well is you can create a collaborative board. Now, I have to say a few disclaimers about this. It doesn't exactly work the way I'd like for it to. So take this with a grain of salt and be willing to experiment with it. It's not a bad tool. I like it. You just have to know a few things, a few quirks. The first thing is that in order to add somebody to a collaborative board, you must be following at least one of their boards. So you and that person who you're adding to your collaborative board must already have a connection. They must have a Pinterest account and you must have a connection already on Pinterest. So keep that in mind as you look at making a collaborative board. If we wanted to look at how to make that collaborative board, if I go to my teaching tab and I went to edit board, I can begin to type in the name of somebody that I know and invite them to join that board. You can do this with as many people as you'd like to, or as few. I actually am part of a collaborative board that has over 700 pins Truly, because it is a collaborative board, and you can see there's over 300 people who collaborate on this board. One thing that I would suggest is that if you do create a collaborative board, that you're very specific about the topic because you would want it to be something that has um, a good topic rather than being so broad that off-topic things might creep in. In closing, I want to just talk about a little bit of Pinterest etiquette. The first thing is that original sources matter. It's important because Pinterest, we are pinning sources. It's important that we actually pin the original source of material, that we not pin the source that references that original source, unless we're talking specifically about what they're saying in reference to the original source. The next thing is that we want to pin permalinks. This means that when you're surfing a blog, sometimes a blog it'll give you a preview of the information and then it'll say read more down at the bottom. Well, when you're looking at that preview, you're looking at a feed of the most recent post. If you pin the picture from that feed, that's going to take you back to the main page of the blog. And in a week, a month, or even a year from now, it may be very difficult to find that original post. So I always recommend that you find that the actual link to the article rather than the article in a feed. The next thing is give credit where credit is due on Pinterest. You know, one thing about creating a virtual learning network is that you want to you want to create a community where you're attributing your friends and the people who you're connecting with. So give them credit, repin their pins if it's valuable. Don't go and find the original, check the original source, make sure that it's accurate, but then repin it from them and show that where you found it from. The next thing that I recommend is that you use pin descriptions and use them thoughtfully. Use them in a way that it will benefit you and that it will benefit other people. And finally, one of the best things about Pinterest is finding authentic and interesting boards. Don't try to pin things because you think other people will be interested in it. Pin things because you're interested in them. Pin what matters to you and pin what you will use because frankly, that's what other people will find interesting as well. I hope that this gives you some good ideas on how you can use Pinterest to develop your personal learning network. This doesn't have to be for developing to using it in class or using it with your students. It really can be focused on developing your personal learning and organizing resources for your classroom and organizing resources so that you can be a more effective teacher. I really am glad that you joined us today for this DigiToolKit webinar. You'll find upcoming webinars on the American College of Education's website. I hope that you will join us for those as well. Coming up this July, we have a webinar about why we love Candy Crush, Angry Birds, and Minecraft, lessons about gaming and education. And then in August, we'll talk about Google and some cool nifty things that maybe you didn't know that you could do with Google tools. Again, this webinar series is offered through the American College of Education, and you can find us at ace.edu.